Alright, so seeing as this is our very first introductory lesson, I just wanted to walk you through and make sure you feel comfortable using the computers here. So we're going to be hanging out mostly with Photoshop for the first half of the semester. Second half will be Adobe Illustrator. If you don't see Photoshop down on the bottom bar of your computer, then it might actually be tucked back in the Launchpad. So go ahead and click on that Launchpad icon right there, and if you scrub through, you'll see somewhere here, there we go, you'll see Photoshop sitting there. It's the blue square with the P and S inside of it. And we're going to go ahead and crack open Photoshop, and it'll load up. And basically this is Photoshop. Here it is. So it's kind of bland looking, kind of gray. On the left-hand side here, we have our toolbar. It's where all the tools we're going to use are going to be located. By the end of the semester, you'll know all of these tools. They're going to be at your disposal. On the right-hand side here, we have our kind of adjustments box. This is going to have any and all tabs that we can actually go back and customize. It's going to allow me to make adjustments to my artwork, as well as carry my layers window. Basically, all of my tabbed windows are going to go off into here. And you can see, just click on them, you can pop them out. You can actually click, hold, and drag, and you can drag it right out of there. And I can move it elsewhere. If I had maybe two screens, that would work fine. I can also go ahead and dock it right back in, and I can actually put more than one on top of each other, in between, or just drag them together, and then they'll be tabbed together whenever I pull them out. Very simple and very easy to use. Alright, so in order to use Photoshop, we need to actually have something to draw or paint upon. So I'm going to do File, and then I'm going to go to the word New. That's going to give me a pop-up window that's going to allow me to customize the size and type of canvas that I'll be painting on. So over here on the right-hand side, you'll see that it says Untitled 1. That's where the title of my canvas is, so I can rename that to basically anything that I want to. Now, for me, I like to name my files as something that I'll definitely make sure to remember. So something as generic as Photoshop Project 01 will absolutely get lost in my files. So instead, let's see, I used to work for a high school, so let's name it something extra mature. Yeah, that should work just fine. Okay, so now below there I have my width and my height. Right now I have it set to 11 by 17. That's a pretty good size for like a poster. Now I can also go ahead and change the type of dimensions that we're talking about here. So where mine says inches, I might also choose centimeters, millimeters, points, picas, or pixels. Most often, seeing as this is an American class, we'll be hanging out in inches, not the metric system. And then also, of course, pixels if you need to make something very specific. So if I was working for a graphic designer, for a web designer, they might need a logo that's exactly 200 pixels. Down below here we have our resolution. Mine's set to 300, and a good rule of thumb for everything we do in this class is going to be to stick to 300 or above. Anything lower than that, when you go to print it, might come out pixelated or grainy in some way. Now with that being said, we can also kind of scroll down here. I'm not going to worry too much about the advanced options, but just so you're aware, our color mode is going to consist of bitmap, grayscale, RGB, CMYK, and lab color. For the sake of this class, grayscale, RGB, and CMYK will basically be everything we use. CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and your key color, which is black. We'll primarily be using RGB, which is good for digital imagery. We also have, we can change the color of our white background or any kind of canvas that we want. We'll stick to a white background as well. Also, I can change the orientation, portrait, or landscape. We'll just do portrait right now. And then go ahead and hit done, and you're good to go. Alright, so here's my canvas, and this is going to be basically what I'm working on too, just like a real-life canvas or a drawing pad or anything like that. I'm going to want to go ahead and use my rectangular marquee tool. It's the dotted line square here over in your toolbar. And I'm going to use that just to draw out, by clicking and dragging, a rectangle that I will then go ahead and fill in using my paint bucket tool. If you've ever used Microsoft Paint or anything like that, any kind of simplistic paint program, this should be very, very normal for you. And then you can go ahead and just draw out with your rectangular tool, any size rectangle that you want to, that's fine. Go over to your toolbar and go ahead down here towards the middle, grab that paint bucket tool, and if you click inside of the rectangular marquee that you just made, with those little dotting kind of marching ants going around there, that means it's selected. If you click inside of there, it will transform your square into a colorful square. Alright, so now that you've done that, if for some reason you don't see your paint bucket tool, if you see that little tiny triangle in the bottom corner on your toolbar, that actually means it's kind of like a drawer you can pop out, and there's other tools inside of that drawer. So if you click and hold, you'll see that I also have the gradient tool as well as another 3D marquee paint bucket tool as well. So your current toolbar might actually be set up for your gradient tool instead. Just click and hold, drag over, and grab the tool that you need. Now let's say that I didn't want the color red for my rectangle. I'm going to go down here in the bottom left corner, and you'll see I have this little tiny red square. Yours might be a different color, with another square behind it. If I double click on that red square, it's going to give me a little pop-up window, and that will give me my color picker menu. So I'm able to use this window here, this large square, to figure out where my intensity is, how intense the color is. I can also figure out the overall saturation of my color. So I can go kind of back and forth. I can also go up and down, and that will showcase the contrast as well. Notice that at the very bottom I have all my darker colors. On the left-hand side I have pure white. So I could actually get all my grayscale over on this side as well. Now, I also can come over a little bit further on the right-hand side. You'll see this kind of rainbow bar. That's where all of my colors are stored. So if I didn't want the color red, of course I could just use that to slide along, and I could pick something else, magenta, blue, cyan, green, yellow, all the way down. So now I can use the combination of this little color slider as well as my color picker window to find the exact color I want and change the color of my red square to something much nicer like green. Now, let's say that I want to change my color in the adjustment bar, but I didn't see the adjustment tabs. I could always go up to Window, click on Color, and that would give me my little pop-up window. I could also talk about swatches for a second. So over here on the right-hand side of my adjustment bar, you'll see that my swatches are just a collection of different colors. The color menu here is just the color picker window on a much smaller scale. I can adjust it and move it around as well. So I'm going to use the swatches here real quick, and I'm going to drop a new rectangle. And it's going to overlap my green one. I'm going to go ahead and transform this one into like a nice magenta kind of pink color. Let's see, grab my paintbrush, grab a new swatch. Alright, we'll grab this one here. And whenever I click, you'll see that Photoshop automatically registers that I have this green square here. And therefore, if I wanted to turn the whole thing this kind of pink color, I would need to click a second time in the green box with my current rectangle selected. That would actually fill in the entire square. That's because we're working with one single layer right now. In the future, we'll talk about layers and how they will drastically benefit your Photoshop ability. Okay, so moving on, I've got my square selected, but let's say I wanted to paint in the background. Well, I could click on the word select up here at the top and click on the word inverse. Now my selection looks exactly the same. However, I am now selecting this background space, not the inside of the square, but the outside of the square. I just changed that to a color yellow so that you could see it. And if I wanted to, I could also make a perfect square by holding down Shift while I click and drag. So now I've got rectangles, I've got the background colored in, and I have a perfect square as well. I'm going to go ahead and fill that in with black. And there we go. So I've made a super abstract, beautiful piece of art with squares and rectangles, right? One last thing I want to throw out to you is this. If you haven't used a Mac before, click on Special Preferences down at the bottom. Always make sure that your Mac mouse is set up to have two buttons, so you have a right click. I know if you come from using PCs, you're used to seeing a right click, but if you click on the word mouse in your system preferences, make sure that the secondary button is selected, not primary. That way you have two. Alright, that wraps up the very first demo of graphic design. See you soon.